What is going on, my beautiful people? So, yesterday, Chelsea and Manchester City played to an incredible 4-4 draw. And so I thought today we're going to be checking out what did we actually learn from Chelsea versus Man City by Tifo IRL. It's going to be a good video. Looking forward to this one. A couple of things I learned. One, Sterling is actually quite good. And I don't know why some Chelsea fans kind of don't like him sometimes. Granted, I don't watch every Chelsea match, so maybe he can be frustrating in some matches, but he was brilliant yesterday. 2, Cole Palmer looks like a gem. 3, Rodri may be the most clutch player right now in the Premier League, certainly for Man City. And 4, this title race this season is going to be fire. They're like, the top 5 is separated by like 2 points, right? Yeah, I think Villa actually 3 points. Villa has 25 and City has 28. And in 6th, United have 21. Don't count us out yet. Yeah, we're not winning the title, but you never know. You never know. We're gonna check this out. Link to the original video will be in the description. Leave a like, subscribe, and without further ado, let's get into it.
In the space of a week, Chelsea have gone from winning 4-1, but actually kind of losing, to drawing 4-4 and actually kind of winning. What to make of that 8-goal thriller? I'm joined by John McKenzie.
Hello.
Right, it was very chaotic.
True. I think on last week Monday, I think Chelsea played Spurs and won 4-1. But at the same time, that didn't really feel like a win against Spurs because 1, Spurs were down to 9 men, and 2, before Spurs were down to 9 men, they actually took the lead. And also they found it still quite difficult to break down 9 men until eventually they did towards the end of the game. So that didn't really feel like, oh, Chelsea came there and sort of conquered Spurs. But against City, this definitely feels like yeah, Chelsea definitely held their own against the best team in England and in Europe and sort of in the world.
Chaotic, wasn't it? All over the place. Why?
Well, I think what we've seen from Chelsea this season is that when teams are going to come out and press them quite high, what they're going to try and do is play very direct. So Man City are a team who are going to press quite high, and all of the elite teams are, which is why I think we've seen Chelsea perform quite well against some of the better teams. But in this game, we saw them pressing right up the field, leaving lots of space at the back to attack. And the way that Chelsea were going to try and get around this was by trying to get through that first initial line of pressure and then try and exploit the space that is left in behind. They're going to do this in 2 different ways. So one thing we saw was them trying to progress the ball, particularly in wide areas. So they're going to try and get the ball out here and then do these bounce combinations, sometimes third man combinations as well, just to get the ball through that initial line of pressure. And then you can try and find someone like Cole Palmer in space, in behind the fullback, and then you can attack at speed.
Okay, so let's look at some examples then.
Yeah, so this is Chelsea building up this way down the field. The ball has just arrived at Rob Sanchez, and what we've got here is Reece James has come in between Doku and Bernardo Silva, as you can see here. Actually, it was quite nice because we've got Disasi pulling Doku out of the way to create a little bit of space so that Reece James can sort of sit between the two of them to open up some space. What's going to happen is we're going to get one of those bounce passes. So Sanchez into Reece James, who's going to play it immediately to Thiago Silva. And Thiago Silva then has got time and space to turn, and he can just play a 1-2 with Reece James. Now, playing into this space now, he's found the free man. That's what you're always trying to do in this build-up scenarios, and you've got a huge amount of space, as you can see, in front of him. So you've got through that first line of pressure, you're into space, and then what we can see here is it causes problems again for Man City. So Gvardiol is on Cole Palmer. Does he go forward to Reece James to try and stop the pass at route, or does he track Cole Palmer? He decides that he can maybe get to Reece James at that moment, but actually isn't able to get close enough. And then we see Palmer in a huge amount of space. You play the ball in behind, and then we get one of those dangerous attacking plays from Chelsea.
So that's one way. And then their other way of approaching the game directly was how?
Yeah, so we've talked about these direct attacks in wide areas, but also when you're playing against teams who are going to try and press you into the sidelines. So a lot of teams are going to squeeze across to try and make it really difficult for you to be able to build up in those situations, is that you can actually find these ways of moving the ball diagonally through the field. We saw Chelsea do this really well against Arsenal. And again, what you're trying to do is you're trying to bounce pass through the first line of pressure, but then you get these openings. So you got Fernando.
To be fair, yeah, I just actually deeped that they drew with Arsenal, a game that they should really have won, considering they were 2-0 up. They beat Spurs. They drew with Liverpool. They drew with City. Have they played any other big team? I don't think so. I don't think so. So they're like unbeaten against like the big teams, which is kind of strange considering how not good Chelsea have been this season.
Fernandes, Sterling in these sorts of lines, so you can move the ball wide and again try and attack these wide areas as well. So that's why Chelsea are playing really aggressively and directly, because that's the best way of being able to beat these teams who press high up the field.
So Chelsea were embracing the chaos with the ball, playing through City's press like that, which is obviously quite risky. But without the ball, they also caused City quite a lot of problems when they were trying to build out, which obviously Guardiola would have hated. And it led to some individual mistakes as well. So talk me through what they were doing out of possession, which is obviously your favourite bit of these recordings.
Obviously. So Chelsea have been playing in what we call generally an option-oriented approach. They're going to play in this 4-4-2 shape. So you've got two forward players and then a line of four behind them. It's option-oriented because you're going to stay in a zonal system, but when players come into your zone, then you'll be quite aggressive on them. And the reason that they're doing this is because often most elite teams are using very flexible build-up structures, which allows them to pull players around. So we know that Man City like to invert one of their centre-backs, push them forward.
Akanji's tempted to midfield a lot. I didn't expect Akanji to be the one to do that. I thought it would have probably been Gvardiol that would have done that job. Akanji did that well yesterday.
Put into this sort of space in behind that first line, and you can maybe get the goalkeeper jumping up as well.
And then in theory, right, because when Stones and Rodri, it's normally Stones in that position, right? When they swap, you drag players with them, and then that opens up space.
That's right.
If that player can't follow them, then right.
Yeah, and so the idea here is that you're doing these rotations in order to try and destabilise the opposition. But actually, what it is that Chelsea do really well is that in this scenario with Akanji dropping forward, it might be the case that you'd expect Jackson to drop back on him. But actually, what we're going to see is Caicedo just saying, well, he's coming towards my zone now, so I'll step forward a little bit, and we can still retain this kind of shape. And what this actually did is it just made it quite hard for Man City to build up. So they're trying to build up from the back. Often the ball was ending up at the feet of Diaz. You've got these two options quite aggressive in the wide areas, and the only thing that was left for Diaz is to sort of play fairly speculative balls into wide areas as well. So the combination of those two things then, Chelsea playing really direct, which means that they're going to be quite aggressive in their positioning as well. Man City not being able to do the controlled build-up that they're doing meant that Man City were often actually looking to hit the space in behind Chelsea in the same way that Chelsea were trying to hit the space in behind Man City. So that's why the game got so transitional, because actually City couldn't control the game through their deep build-up, and so the ball just ended up basketballing forward.
Right. I thought the game kind of changed when Grealish came on. For whatever reason, Doku didn't have a good game against Reece James, but when Grealish came on, City seemed to have a bit more calmness, more control. They started sort of, I've not seen the stats, but I'm pretty sure City had more of the ball over the course of the match because they are City and that's what they do. But I thought when Grealish came on, there was a sense of control, a sense of calmness around the entire squad, because he just took it, started going around players, started playing simple passes to Bernardo, because the combination between Silva and Grealish against Manchester United was particularly deadly. Because Grealish, he was playing out left, but he would come inside, and Bernardo would go on the outside of him, playing almost like a false winger, and Grealish coming into play like the number 10. And so they caused a lot of havoc against United. So when he came on against Chelsea, he sort of brought this calmness to Man City's game when they started playing more football and less of the chaotic mayhem stuff. So yeah, that's what I noticed during the match anyway.
Right. Do you think the game might have been different had different players been selected? For example, Pep likes to play Grealish for control, as he did against Manchester.
I mean, I'll take a bit of credit in that, innit? I'll take some credit. I'll take some credit. The tactics are your boy is in with the tactics, innit?
United, but he went with Doku, who's much more of a direct dribbler.
Yeah.
And obviously he was missing Stones. So do you think that had an impact on how they had to approach the game?
I think so, yeah. And I think when these games become transitional as well, it starts exacerbating problems that you might not usually see with certain players. So we've talked about John Stones not being around. John Stones is excellent at playing alongside Rodri, because what this allows them to do then is to have a more controlled build-up where they're moving the ball through lines of pressure, finding free men, and actually being able to move the ball through the centre of the field, which is much more dangerous, obviously. If you're left with Diaz having to play long balls into the channels to players like Doku and Foden, you're not going to be able to control the game quite so well. These sorts of fullbacks are going to be able to actually compete with them in those sorts of areas. So missing stones is a big one, for sure. We also saw with the game getting quite transitional that it actually upset some of the players. They weren't playing at the sort of level that you might expect them to. In these kind of games, Rodri can look a little bit exposed sometimes because his mobility isn't quite the level to look as controlled as he usually does. But I thought Ruben Dias looked especially under a huge amount of pressure.
Diaz didn't have a great game yesterday by any stretch of the imagination.
In the game, because he was being put into scenarios that he's not usually put into, and he was actually quite chaotic as well.
Yeah, and even if he is put into those scenarios in other games, right, normally he has more options to get out of it, like having stones, right? And he made a mistake under pressure that led to a goal that Gvardiol also made a mistake in. Do you want to just talk us through those two incidents that led to Sterling's tap-in?
Yeah, so a few things happening here that I think just show the way that Man City players can be exposed with a little bit of pressure. So what we've got here is the run-up to the second goal that Chelsea score. So Rob Sanchez has taken a goal kick here, and it's actually arrived at Walker, who's played a fairly controlled header back to Ruben Dias here. Now, Chelsea have done some interesting things here to try and pull that back line around, but as we can see, you've got 4 defenders in this area here around about 3 Chelsea attackers. So not a huge amount of pressure that they're under here. But Ruben Dias, because he's been pulled out of position, the ball arrives at him in a bit of an awkward situation and he just ends up flapping at it. So you can see here, he's just sort of swung his foot at it and it ends up falling to the Chelsea player here. And now you can see with the wide players coming in on the other side of the field, this is going to become quite a dangerous situation. We've got Gvardiol here, who's going to become exposed quite quickly. So you mentioned again, Gvardiol makes a mistake. We have Cole Palmer here, Gvardiol almost playing as a left back. And I've drawn a line on the field here, which is just the line, the vertical line of the pitch from the ball. And what actually ends up happening here is that Gvardiol has gone on the wrong side of that line, because I think usually as a fullback, you can be in a bit of danger if you get on the wrong side of that line, because it opens up the possibility of an inside ball, which the Reece James in this case can just run around the back of. This becomes even more of a problem for Gvardiol because that ball is played, and actually because he's facing that way out towards the touchline, he has to turn around because the ball's come on the other side of him. He loses track of the ball and it actually bounces off the back of his heel, falls perfectly to Reece James, and the ball can come across into this area for Sterling to tap in. So again, what we're seeing is because Manchester City are being destabilised, some of their players are making the sorts of decisions that you might not expect. Because Manchester City come across.
I feel like in this position, Walker should be goal side of Sterling, because Walker seems to be... So Walker can see this is happening, but I don't think he's really focusing on the fact that Sterling is in sort of a prime position to tap something in if play goes Chelsea's way in this instance. And so Walker should maybe be a bit more switched on to Sterling's runs, because he's played with Sterling for quite a number of years at Man City, so he should know the kinds of runs that Sterling usually makes, and I think he should maybe be a bit more switched on. But with that being said, it's not necessarily Walker's fault. It's more Gvardiol's for not being able to sort out his feet and allowing Reece James to get the ball and get the cross in.
Cross into this area for Sterling to tap in. So again, what we're seeing is because Manchester City are being destabilised, some of their players are making the sorts of decisions that you might not expect players at this level to make, and so the chaos actually means that Man City lose out a little bit more.
So a combination of good pressure from Chelsea, good passing, and a couple of individual mistakes, which everybody needs when you play Man City if you're going to score, right? But also, obviously, part of this approach from Chelsea is that it leaves themselves exposed, because you know, as you've said many times, football tactics is all about trade-offs. If you're going to play like that against City, there's a risk that City will punish you for it. And City scored 4 goals themselves. So talk me through how they did that. So
we've already talked about how Chelsea are pressing quite aggressively in their 4-4-2 press. Sometimes it can end up looking almost like a 4-2-4 press, because the wide players are going to get up onto the Manchester City fullbacks. And what this does then is it can leave space that can be exploited in these wide areas, in particular in between the areas between the fullback and the wide forward. And what we saw a few times was Man City being able to exploit these sorts of situations. So I've got a few examples of this happening for Chelsea. Now I want to start with one that happened last week against Spurs, because this is where the Spurs goal came from. So this is Chelsea in their high press phase. They're pressing this way down the field against Spurs, and you can see here Cole Palmer nominally playing as the wide forward, really high and aggressive in his positioning. this means that the area that he's supposed to be covering on the wing is open, and so Spurs are able to find Maddison in that space. And because Palmer is so far off the play, that means the rest of the midfield has to shift around. That means you're going to create a far side weakness. And what we see here from Maddison is he can play the ball across here to Pape Sarr, and then you're in this situation now where you've got the Chelsea back line here, quite narrow. You've got 5 Spurs players running, most of them in between the line of the midfield and the defensive line. And what ends up happening, as you can see, Kulusevski has a huge amount of space to get into, and this causes problems for Chelsea.
Presumably Man City tried to take advantage of the same kind of weakness.
Yeah, so we saw this happening a little bit in the game itself. So this is just before the penalty is given for Manchester City's first goal. And again, we can see, here's Cole Palmer. He's pressing quite aggressively high up on Gvardiol.
Wow. That's Enzo and that's Caicedo. Those are their holding midfielders. This is aggressively high. Wow.
And so if we fast forward the tape now 15 seconds, Man City actually win the ball back and they progress the ball down the field. But we can see again now we've got the...
But to be fair, Gallagher was down. So Gallagher was down at this point because I think he got into a sort of... When he tried to make a tackle on, was it Ruben Diaz or something? I don't know. But he was down and left out of the play. So that's probably why there is this numerical advantage, because pretty sure now Caicedo they have to stay compact and narrow towards the center, because teams always like to prevent teams from coming in through the center. And so there's this big, wide open space on the left-hand side that City can exploit.
Chelsea back 4. Here's their midfield 3 with Sterling dropping in. No sign of Cole Palmer whatsoever. That's 15 seconds that have elapsed, and it's allowed Man City to generate an overload in this wide area. Actually, this is the overload that results in the ball being crossed in for the penalty that's given away. So we can see that there is a possibility.
That penalty, by the way, is never a penalty. Never. It's so soft. It's so... Anyway, we're not here to talk about referees or VAR. We're here to talk about Chelsea and Man City. But they had an impact. So, I will talk about it. I don't know, City seemed... Because against United, City also benefited from a fairly soft penalty decision. And they've done it again. They seem to be benefited from these decisions. I remember against Arsenal. I'm glad that Arsenal won, because Kovacic should have been sent off in that match, and he wasn't. So I don't know. I'm not that kind of guy that's like, oh yeah, City sort of pays refs or this, that, and the other, blah, blah. But they seem to get quite a lot of fortuitous decisions from referees and VARs. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything shady going on. There could be, but it's very, very sort of, it's a pattern that seems to be emerging, I would say.
Ability for Chelsea's structure to be broken down as well by going aggressive in the high press.
Mm-hmm. And did Chelsea do anything to try to alleviate that kind of weakness? Like Gallagher started to move over to the right, didn't he? Because he's much more of a naturally kind of defensive thinking player.
Yeah, that's exactly what we saw in the second half. So we saw Gallagher actually playing in the Cole Palmer position, Palmer more central. Now, there's obviously in possession reasons why you might do that as well, but I think probably the bigger prompt to do that is that they didn't want to allow these sorts of weaknesses to open up. But there are also weaknesses from this approach anyway that we've talked about, because if you're going to press high up against Man City, they are also very dangerous on the counter as well. So
they can also
the third goal.
They can also go long to Haaland. They have a good hold-up player, but there's quite a lot of space for Foden on this right-hand side as well. So
that Man City scored. And what we can see here is that Chelsea pressing super high up the field. And what we've got here is Bernardo Silva receiving the ball. He's going to play the ball directly to Erling Haaland here. And because Caicedo here jumps in on Haaland, we have the same sort of situation where this weakness on the far side opens up. So if we fast forward, we can see there's Caicedo jumping in to try and stop Haaland from being able to get ball progression. And now you're in that same situation where one ball into the middle, defended badly, actually ends up with this far side weakness. So I think that's going to be something we maybe see happening with teams playing against Chelsea, trying to expose their high press.
But one interesting element of this goal that I think a lot of people might be confused by is why Caicedo is on Haaland at all and why Thiago Silva is all the way over here. So is there a reason for that?
Yeah, this is interesting. I mean, I don't know what the reason would be, but this is from a throw-in, so I assume what they've decided is that in this scenario, they would rather have Caicedo on Haaland man to man, because as we see, when the ball gets to Haaland, he steps up on him and is quite aggressive. So maybe the idea here is that because we're going high and because Thiago Silva might not be as good tracking back defensively in these situations, they swap the position of Caicedo and Silva. Now, it could also be the case that this has just happened after a set piece. So a corner or something. So Silva is up there as well. But essentially what they've done is they've just rotated. So we've got Silva here and Caicedo here. And actually, if you run the tape on, you can see that Caicedo makes a very central midfielder decision when the ball comes around the side, when Alvarez plays it across, to actually step back and defend the edge of the box rather than the final line. And had it been Thiago Silva, he might have stepped into that final line and tried to actually block the ball from coming across as well.
Chelsea love playing teams that leave them space to attack into. Pep Guardiola hates chaos. Chelsea are kind of on the up. Anything else? Like, what's your overall kind of takeaway from this game?
So as you mentioned, I think this is a really good example of why Pep Guardiola hates chaos.
Hates chaos, yeah.
Man City, there was a few situations where they were able to control the game, but then Pochettino would make tweaks to destabilise things again. And it just makes it so much harder for Man City to get the best upside from the sorts of players that they have. And that's the best way of levelling the playing field, I think, against Manchester City, is by making the games chaotic, because then you have you're much more likely to be able to compete with them. Now, that does result in a game like a 4-4 draw, and it could have been a 4-3 win to Man City, so it could have gone wrong were it not for that penalty right at the end. But this is why teams want to try and make games against Man City chaotic, because it's probably your best chance of going toe-to-toe with them. But I think what we've seen from Chelsea, a lot of people are making.
But there's obviously also a risk to that, because if, let's say, if Man City were able to play through the press one time and got in on Chelsea and then they scored, that changes Chelsea's mindset. At least I think it would. But to be fair, they did score first in the game, but Chelsea was able to come back. But let's say they scored the first time and then they score again and it's like 2-0. Then there will be a change of mentality to sort of be like, okay, let's drop back, let's press. So it's like, it's obviously always give and take. If you've got that high pressure, high intense pressing against Man City, it's fine, it can work, it can destabilize Man City. But at the same time, if they get through it and get past it, then you're creating a lot of trouble for your defense as well. So in everything, it's give and take.
Making a lot of sweeping statements about Chelsea off the back of this result. But I think what we've seen from Chelsea this season is that they are quite competitive against teams that press up high, because they have that ability to play bounce passes quickly through the lines. They can switch the ball from one side to the other into runners. They have really aggressive players as well. So this sort of game is what is going to suit them. Another thing we could take away is John Stones is going to be a big miss for Manchester City, I think, because they weren't able to actually dominate the game in the deeper build-up, because they're missing his ability on the ball. And then, the other thing is, are we going to start seeing Chelsea come a cropper against teams that actually realise that they have these weaknesses on the far side? If they can break quickly against them and switch the play, it could lead to them conceding goals as well.
And if they struggle to break down low blocks or high lines of 7 as they did last weekend, then that could create quite a weird season for them, where they get good results against the big
teams and they're struggling against
smaller teams. Right? I remember Klopp's Liverpool in their early stages kind of struggled with the same thing, where they really enjoyed the end-to-end transitional games where Salah could run into space, but they played Burnley once, had 80% possession and lost 2-0. So that's just quite common among the early stages of this sort of team, right? Especially with such a young team. But hopefully they might, for Chelsea's point of view, hopefully they might get over that and start to dominate games more.
Yeah, I think there's a reason why Pep likes to control games, and that is because when you control games, it's easier to come out on top in most games, right? And I think that Pochettino is going to find the same thing. Like, as we've said, if you can create chaos and you can benefit from that chaos, you're going to win games against some of the better teams. But being a top team isn't about creating chaos and coming out on top. It's about actually consistently winning games. And there comes a point which we see all managers go through, right? Jurgen Klopp went through it. Eddie Howe is going to have to go through it with Newcastle. And I think Pochettino is going to have to go through it as well, which is, okay, this sort of style of play is going to be good in knockout competitions, but if you want to challenge at the top of the Premier League, you have to have maybe a little bit more consistency in terms of what you're doing in possession as well.
Great. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Ruben.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing.
So yeah, that was the video. Great video by Tifo IRL. Chelsea this season, I think it's definitely very much a transitional season. hopefully, I think their aims probably this season will probably be to finish top 8, top 7. I don't know if they can get into the top 4. Maybe they can get into Europe, but the question is, do they want to get into Europe? I think they probably need another season where they aren't in Europe and they are sort of building and learning Poch's system, and so that they'll have a better chance of sort of challenging towards the top. Again, just like how Spurs are doing this season. For Man City, it is what it is for Man City. They'll go on. I think they have Liverpool next. That's going to be an exciting game. But yeah, it was a really entertaining game. Chelsea are looking good. If some of the other youngsters, I think Lavia is still out for them. I think Nkunku is still out for them. They may both be back after the international break. But if they certainly get their squad up and running like together and get the cohesion there and get consistent games out of them and start implementing Poch's play style and whatnot, they would definitely be a dangerous team for any team to play this season. But yeah, that was the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please leave a like, subscribe for more. Link to the original video will be down below, and until next time,